the capital of poultry and the birth of a very peculiar law. If you've ever wondered how the universe decides which towns receive historical dignity and which ones are gifted with the kind of law that makes future generations squint and say, "Wait, really?" then allow me to present Gainesville, Georgia, a city so proud of its poultry that in the early 1960s it decided chicken wasn't just food. It was identity, destiny, and a matter of civic discipline. Before the famous law, Gainesville was already known far and wide as the poultry capital of the world, a title bestowed with no small amount of clucking pride. The city practically oozed chicken-related energy. Visitors reported that even the air had a faint aroma of fried goodness, and the locals swore that if you stood still long enough, somebody would try to season you. And yet, despite living in a place where fried chicken reigned supreme, there existed a brewing disquiet. A soft, crunchy tension. A hushed scandal no one dared openly address. People, outsiders mainly, but sometimes locals in moments of weakness, were eating fried chicken with forks. Yes, forks, stainless steel, cold, unfeeling. Utensils designed not for poultry domination, but for salads and disappointments. And on this matter, Gainesville said, absolutely not. Now, before we reach the iconic 1961 ordinance itself, we must first understand the cultural battlefield upon which this culinary war was waged. Gainesville's fried chicken was not just fried chicken. It was heritage. It was history. It was the crispy golden hymn of the city's soul. Men in suits and women in Sunday dresses gathered for chicken the way others gathered for sermons. There are rumours, unverified, but repeated with the confidence of truth, that babies in Gainesville teethed not on plastic rings, but on small pieces of fried drumstick bone. If a wedding served anything other than fried chicken, guests whispered concerns that the couple would surely be cursed. And the local newspaper once ran an editorial headlined simply, "Chicken, we thank you." So imagine, dear listener, the scandal when Gainesville City Council, in a series of unfortunate encounters, witnessed visitors, unprepared, uninitiated, uninformed, eating fried chicken with forks and knives. The first incident concerned a businessman from New York who had ordered chicken at a beloved Gainesville establishment. When his plate arrived, he inspected the drumstick as if it were a suspicious artifact. Then, in a move that made onlookers gasp, he took out a fork. He cut into the chicken, cut into it, fork and knife together. Tag team treason. A woman dropped her sweet tea in shock. A man clutched his chest as though personally wounded. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed in despair. The businessman's companion, unaware of the crisis unfolding, remarked, "This is delicious," which only added insult to injury. Who eats great fried chicken with utensils? What kind of monster enjoys such a thing? This was Gainesville, after all, not some lawless culinary wasteland like, well, anywhere north of Atlanta. Word travelled fast. The entire restaurant spent a week recounting the tale. Some insisted the man was fined on the spot. Others swore a chicken spirit cursed him. Children reenacted the scene as a cautionary skit during school assemblies. Weeks later, another visitor, this time from Ohio, committed a similar atrocity. He was polite, yes, friendly, yes, but he dissected his fried chicken with surgical precision, cutting it into tiny squares. Squares, like it was a casserole. By the time a third incident occurred, a tourist from Chicago, using a fork and wiping grease off his fingers with a kind of clinical anxiety, Gainesville had reached its limit. One cannot be called the poultry capital of the world and then stand idly by while guests treat fried chicken as if it requires flatware and propriety. Fried chicken, Gainesville believed, was meant to be an experience. Grease should glisten on the fingertips, not be avoided like an enemy. A true drumstick should be gripped with purpose, with confidence, with primal enthusiasm. And so the council convened. They met in the old city hall, a building that smelled faintly of lemon polish and faintly more of chicken, because everything in Gainesville smelled faintly of chicken. The room buzzed with outrage. "We cannot let this continue," declared Councilman Harwood, a man with a moustache so grand it was rumoured to be classified as a historical landmark. "If we let them use forks, what's next? Dicing chicken? Fork-free tofu? Salad?" People shuddered. Not at tofu, though that caused some discomfort too, but at the thought of fried chicken being reduced to polite table manners. Councilwoman Gladys Bruton, known for her sharp tongue and sharper biscuit recipes, leaned forward. "Eating fried chicken with a fork undermines everything Gainesville stands for. Everything. Our brand, our culture, our pride." A murmur of agreement swept the room. "It's not how chicken was meant to be eaten," a man added. "It's unnatural," said another. "It's un-American," someone muttered. And so, after much deliberation, some heated, some tearful, the council drafted what would become one of the most legendary ordinances in American culinary history. It would be illegal within city limits to eat fried chicken with anything other than one's fingers. It was not an ordinance of anger. No, it was an ordinance of love. Love for tradition, for heritage, for the authentic finger-licking method by which fried chicken was intended to be enjoyed. The final vote passed unanimously. Even Councilman Bates, who usually dissented on principle, agreed wholeheartedly. A cheer rose from the spectators. Someone in the gallery released a single live chicken in celebration, prompting minor confusion but considerable excitement. The mayor himself signed the ordinance with a flourish, using a pen shaped like a tiny drumstick, a ceremonial pen used only for the most sacred of documents. And thus it was declared, "In Gainesville, Georgia, thou shalt eat thy fried chicken with thy fingers." In the weeks that followed, Gainesville transformed almost overnight. Restaurants proudly displayed signs that read, "Utensils are for sides only. Your chicken is watching. In this house, we eat with our hands." It became a badge of honor, a rite of passage. People traveled from nearby towns just to say they had eaten chicken the Gainesville way. Children learned the sacred chicken grip in school. Teenagers rebelled by eating boneless wings with forks, which parents met with a combination of concern and disappointment. Tourists loved it. Newspapers ran stories about it. Gainesville basked in the attention, delighted that the world finally understood what they had always known. Fried chicken is not food. It is a philosophy. But as with all good stories, not everyone agreed with the new ordinance. Some residents felt it was unnecessary. "People should choose how they eat," complained one man, who was immediately suspected of harboring anti-chicken sentiments. Others argued it was unenforceable. "What are we going to do, arrest Grandma?" another man asked, unaware that years later a grandmotherly figure would indeed become the centre of attention. But we'll get to her in due time. Yet even the critics understood the ordinance was largely ceremonial. A statement, a gesture, a finger-licking proclamation of identity. Gainesville wasn't planning to actually arrest people, or so they believed. But unbeknownst to them, fate was writing a far stranger chapter, one involving a 91-year-old, a fork, a piece of chicken, and a moment of local history so delightfully absurd it would cement Gainesville's place in the pantheon of America's weirdest laws. That, however, is a story for another day. For now, Gainesville had done what no other city dared to do. They drew a line, not in the sand, but in the grease. And the world, watching from afar, smiled and said, "Of course this happened in Georgia." And Gainesville, hearing that, simply replied, "You're welcome." The era of finger-only enforcement. After Gainesville passed its now legendary fried chicken by fingers ordinance, the city settled into a period that local historians later described as mostly normal, except for the chicken thing. Residents lived their lives, attended church, mowed their lawns, and enjoyed their fried chicken with fingers proudly glistening, like the righteous, grease-anointed citizens they believed themselves to be. And yet, as with any law rooted in theatrical purpose rather than necessity, there lingered a question. Would it ever actually be enforced? Most citizens thought the answer was obvious. Of course not. The rule was symbolic, ceremonial, akin to a badge one wears to remind the world that Gainesville takes chicken seriously. But laws, once written, have a way of attracting enforcement like a porch light attracts moths. Or in this case, perhaps like a friar attracts chickens, metaphorically speaking. The first stirrings of enforcement came quietly. It began on a sticky summer afternoon when Officer Earl Dusty Jenkins, Gainesville's most enthusiastic but least effective police officer, strolled into Mama Bird's diner. Mama Bird's was known for three things: its iced tea so sweet it could power a jet engine, its fried chicken served on plates warmed to approximately the surface of the sun, and the owner herself, a woman known only as Mama Bird, though her real name was Myrtle. Officer Dusty entered for his usual, a three-piece dinner and a conversation he would inevitably never finish because he talked faster than his brain could process. He sat at the counter, nodded to Mama Bird, and received a plate of golden chicken that glowed with divine purpose. But then he saw it. At a corner table, a teenager was cutting into a piece of fried chicken with a fork. Dusty's fork, mid-air, covered in mashed potatoes, froze. His jaw dropped. His eyes widened. He made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a distressed hen. He blinked twice, slowly, as though trying to refresh the world around him, certain it must be a hallucination. But no, the teen was indeed using a fork. Worse, he was using it confidently, deliberately, as though fried chicken were not sacred, as though knives and forks were not the sworn enemies of Gainesville's cultural soul. Dusty watched in horror as the boy sliced a crisp, juicy piece with the surgical precision of someone who had never been taught proper Southern etiquette. The teen lifted the piece to his mouth with the fork, ate it, chewed contentedly. It was a crime scene, a felony of manners. Dusty slid off his stool so quickly he nearly toppled into a basket of hush puppies. He approached the table with the gravity of a man who believed he was fulfilling destiny. "Son," Dusty said, voice shaking, "I'm going to have to ask you to put that utensil down." The teenager looked up, confused, fork still mid-bite. "Huh? You know the law," Dusty croaked, trying desperately not to gag at the metallic intruder desecrating a drumstick. "Chicken, fingers only. It's ordinance. Well, it's a thing." The teen blinked slowly, chewed slowly, swallowed even more slowly, and then said, "Dude, I'm from Wisconsin." This explained everything. Wisconsin was far outside the zone where chicken etiquette was baked into childhood. Mama Bird, who had been eavesdropping from behind the counter, because she eavesdropped on everyone as a matter of moral duty, folded her arms. "This ain't about where you're from. This is Gainesville. Here, we do things the right way." Dusty nodded, encouraged. "Yeah, the right way!" "What's the right way?" the teen asked, clearly missing the gravity of his situation. Dusty's hand trembled as he pointed at the chicken. "With your fingers. Always your fingers." The teen looked down at the fork as though seeing it for the first time. He sighed dramatically. "My mum says eating with my hands is barbaric." Gasps rippled through the diner. One elderly man crossed himself. Someone dropped a biscuit in shock. Mama Bird stepped forward. "Honey," she said gently but firmly, "there are two kinds of people in this world. Those who eat fried chicken with their fingers and those who need guidance." Dusty placed his hand on the teen's shoulder. "Son, I'm gonna issue you a warning." "A warning? For using a fork?" "Yes," Dusty said solemnly, "but only because you're not from around here. We're merciful to visitors." The boy sighed and put the fork down. Mama Bird nodded proudly, the crisis averted. Dusty returned to his counter seat, feeling heroic. The diner returned to its usual chatter. And thus unofficial enforcement began. Word of the incident spread through Gainesville in the same way all important news spread, through gossip, church bulletins, and the town's grandmother network, which was more efficient and terrifying than any telecommunications company. Mothers told their children, children told their classmates. The high school principal made a morning announcement reminding students that forks were acceptable for mashed potatoes only. The pastor worked a subtle chicken reference into his next sermon, saying, "Let us not forget the tools God gave us for nourishment," causing knowing nods throughout the congregation. Gainesville had never been more united. Yet, for all the enthusiasm, actual enforcement was rare. Dusty was too nervous to give a real ticket. The other officers considered the ordinance more of a ceremonial artifact. Most violations happened only because tourists didn't know the rules, and the locals took great delight in gently correcting them. But there were troublemakers. A few residents, particularly teenagers, found thrill in challenging the ordinance. Some would bring forks to picnics and hold them like contraband. Others dared each other to cut chicken into squares, the most unforgivable form of utensil-based butcher. One boy even tried to eat fried chicken with chopsticks, which caused such explosive debate that the local newspaper had to dedicate an entire editorial to the question, "Do chopsticks count as forks?" The editorial never reached consensus. Yet none of these incidents compared to the scandal that erupted when the ordinance unexpectedly reached the ears of national newspapers. The Atlanta Journal ran a small article. "Gainesville declares chicken should be eaten by hand." It was meant as light-hearted fluff. But then a reporter from the New York Times saw the story, chuckled, and wrote a longer piece titled, "Georgia Town Defends Fried Chicken Honor." The story spread. Soon Chicago papers were referencing it. Then it appeared in quirky news sections across the country. Gainesville found itself in the national spotlight. At first, the residents responded with pride. Their ordinance was being discussed, their traditions appreciated, their chicken philosophy admired. Restaurants hung the newspaper clipping alongside photos of celebrities, because in Gainesville, a mention in the New York Times was basically the same thing as being visited by royalty. But attention, as it often does, brought problems. tourists arrived specifically to test the law. Some came to see whether they'd be arrested for using a fork. Others came to watch their friends get mock-arrested. Still others, college students primarily, came to the city purely to cause chicken-based mischief, a crime Gainesville had not previously known how to categorize. One group of mischievous outsiders arrived wearing shirts that read, "Free the Fork." Another group carried novelty forks so large they looked like parade props. A particularly bold traveller cut his chicken flamboyantly, hoping to be escorted out dramatically. Instead, he was scolded by a waitress, who then brought him wet wipes to clean the shame off his hands. The city council was horrified, but also flattered. The ordinance had become not just a law, but a cultural spectacle. And so, in an effort to manage the growing chaos, the mayor established the Fried Chicken Quality and Customs Advisory Committee, which was essentially a group of older residents meeting weekly to debate exactly how strictly the ordinance should be observed. They issued such statements as, "It is permissible to use a fork when the chicken has bones that defy reasonable access. Utensils may accompany chicken only to realign it after inappropriate cutting. A person may use a fork if and only if fingers are injured in a tragic chicken-related accident." These recommendations were written with the conviction and detail typically reserved for treaties. Still, despite all the talk, despite the committees and the tourists and the giant protest forks, no one had ever been formally charged under the fried chicken ordinance. But fate has a funny sense of timing, because years later, decades even, Gainesville's infamous law would finally, spectacularly, hilariously be enforced. Not on a rebellious teenager, not on a smug tourist, not even on a man wielding chopsticks, but on a 91-year-old grandmother celebrating her birthday. History has strange tastes, and Gainesville was about to take another bite. The arrest heard around the nation. The sun rose on Gainesville one crisp spring morning, as it always did. Slowly, politely, as if it were also still waking up. Birds chirped, roosters crowed, and somewhere in the distance a friar crackled to life, sizzling like a hymn in the sacred church of Southern cooking. It was a day destined to become legendary, a day that would forever change the law of Gainesville's most peculiar ordinance, a day when the one thing that everyone said would never happen, finally happened. It began with a birthday. Not just any birthday either. This was the 91st birthday of Louise Lulu Brown, a woman whose reputation in Gainesville was larger than life. Lulu had been born during the Harding administration, survived 2 world wars, taught 3 generations of children piano, and once single-handedly chased a raccoon out of the church basement using only a broom and sheer conviction. She was, as the locals lovingly put it, too stubborn for the Lord to take early. Every year, Lulu celebrated her birthday the same way, by having lunch at Gainesville's beloved restaurant, Gus's Good Eats. She'd sit at her usual table near the window, order the same meal, fried chicken, coleslaw and sweet tea, and tell the same story about the time she accidentally won the Miss Gainesville pageant because the judges thought her talent routine was interpretive poetry, when really she'd just forgotten the words to her own speech. So when Lulu walked into Gus's for her 91st birthday lunch, wearing her lucky lavender sweater and her church-appropriate pearl necklace, the entire staff greeted her with reverence. Because Lulu Brown wasn't just a customer, she was an institution. She took her seat. She ordered her chicken. She thanked her waitress with a warm smile. And then, when her steaming plate arrived, golden, crispy, smelling faintly of heaven, she reached into her purse and pulled out a fork. A metal fork, a shiny fork. A fork with an edge that glinted like danger in the soft restaurant lighting. The diners nearby froze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A baby paused mid-cry. It was as though someone had hit the mute button on Gainesville itself. Lulu didn't notice. She never noticed when she caused public panic. She simply lifted her fork, as she had been lifting forks for nearly a century, and cut into her fried chicken with the calm assurance of a woman who had lived far too long to care about the opinions of others. The entire room held its breath. At a nearby booth, a man whispered urgently to his wife, "Should we stop her?" "Stop Lulu?" the wife murmured back. "Honey, I'm not stepping between that woman and her birthday meal." The waitress hurried toward the kitchen. "Gus!" she called out. "It's happening! She's doing it! She's using a fork!" Gus, broad, barrel-chested, a man whose passion for chicken rivaled his love of his 9 grandchildren, dropped a basket of fries in shock. Not Lulu. But it was too late. The first bite had been taken. The deed was done. Word spread through the restaurant like gossip at a beauty parlour. By the second bite, someone had called their cousin. By the third bite, someone had called the newspaper. By the fourth bite, a teenager posted a blurry photo online with the caption, "Y'all, someone is using a fork at Gus's. Send prayers." And somewhere, tragically, inevitably, someone called the police. Officer Dusty Jenkins was on duty when the call came through. It is essential to remember that Dusty was the same officer who had once nearly cited a tourist at Mama Bird's for improper utensil usage. This was his moment, his destiny, his chicken-related calling. When he heard the words fork and fried chicken in the same sentence, something in him snapped to attention like a military salute. "I'm on my way," he said, speeding out of the parking lot with such enthusiasm that he left behind a cloud of dust and a soundtrack of squealing tires, which in Gainesville was considered an acceptable form of siren. He arrived at Gus's Good Eats in under 2 minutes. He pushed through the restaurant doors like a cowboy entering a saloon. His eyes scanned the room. Then he saw her, Louise Brown, 91 years old, wearing lavender, eating fried chicken with a fork. It was, in his eyes, the gravest violation Gainesville had ever witnessed. Dusty approached her table with the slow, dramatic steps of a man about to perform something incredibly important and incredibly stupid. "Ma'am," he said gently. Lulu looked up, fork halfway to her mouth. "Oh, hello, Dusty," she said warmly. "Happy to see you, dear. Want some chicken?" "Ma'am," he said again, swallowing hard. "I'm afraid you're breaking the law." Lulu blinked. She lowered her fork. "I beg your pardon?" Dusty straightened. "It is illegal to eat fried chicken with that." He pointed at the fork as though it were a weapon. Lulu squinted at him. "Dusty Jenkins, you listen to me. I've been eating fried chicken longer than you've been alive. The only laws that apply at my birthday lunch are the laws of flavour." Dusty's eye twitched. "Ma'am, I have to enforce it." The diners gasped. The waitress fainted. Gus leaned on the counter for support, clutching his chest. And Lulu Brown slowly, dramatically set her fork down on her napkin. She looked Dusty dead in the eye and said, "You wouldn't dare." But Dusty would. Dusty did. He issued her a citation, a formal, printed, city-sanctioned citation for eating fried chicken with a fork. Silence fell on Gus's good eats. Even the chicken fryer seemed to pause in disbelief. Lulu read the citation. She adjusted her glasses. Then she looked up, utterly expressionless, and said, "Well, this is ridiculous, and I'm not paying it. I'm going to see the mayor." And so she did. The moment Lulu stepped out of the restaurant with the ticket in her hand, the story spread like wildfire. People called their families, they called the news, they called their cousin who knows a guy at CNN. Within hours, Gainesville was buzzing. By the next morning, reporters lined the streets. Satellite vans clogged the parking lot outside City Hall. Social media was ablaze with headlines like, "91-year-old woman cited for eating chicken with a fork." "Georgia grandmother rebels against chicken law." "Finger food fiasco grips Gainesville." Inside City Hall, Mayor Shirley Whitcomb, sharp, sensible, beloved, and absolutely overwhelmed, paced her office in frantic circles. "This is a circus," she muttered to her secretary. "A circus and a comedy sketch wrapped in a public relations nightmare." At noon, Lulu arrived. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She simply opened the mayor's office door, stepped inside with her birthday sweater, and declared, "Shirley, darling, we need to talk about your chicken law." Mayor Whitcomb sighed. "Lulu, I am begging you. Please tell me you didn't threaten Officer Jenkins." Lulu scoffed. "I did no such thing. I simply refused to pay a fine for eating my lunch the way the Lord intended." "With a fork?" the mayor asked dryly. "With dignity," Lulu shot back. Mayor Whitcomb pinched the bridge of her nose. "Lulu, this law was never meant to be enforced." "Well, perhaps you should have told Dusty that," Lulu said with a sniff. The mayor's secretary knocked and poked her head in. "Madam Mayor, CNN wants to know if you'll be making a statement." "CNN!" the mayor yelped, "and the Associated Press, and, oh dear, the Food Network." The mayor collapsed into her chair. The Food Network. Meanwhile, outside City Hall, a massive crowd gathered. Handmade signs waved in the air. "Let Lulu live." "Freedom to fork." "Unhand our grandmothers." Cameras rolled. Reporters shouted into microphones. Local teens sold lemonade to the news crews at $5 a cup. The mayor, recognizing that the situation was now beyond normal governance, made a decision that would define Gainesville history. She granted Lulu Brown a full, unconditional pardon. At the press conference, Mayor Whitcomb stepped up to the podium and said, "It is the judgment of this office that Mrs. Louise Brown is hereby forgiven for her utensil-based infraction. Gainesville wishes her a happy 91st birthday, and we deeply regret any interruption of her lunch." The crowd cheered. Lulu stepped forward, smiled sweetly, and said into the cameras, "Thank you, dearies, and next time, bring me cake." Reporters went wild. CNN aired a full segment. Late-night talk shows joked about it. The Gainesville chicken ordinance became a national punchline, a beloved curiosity, and one of those strange American stories that gets retold for decades. And through it all, Lulu Brown never once apologized. She framed the citation and hung it in her hallway next to her family photos. It remained there until her passing, a permanent reminder of the day she took on City Hall with a fork and won. Gainesville never forgot. The town never laughed harder. And the story of Lulu and the chicken fork became folklore. A legend whispered at barbecues, recounted in diners, and joyfully retold to tourists who asked, "Is the chicken law really real?" Not only was it real, it had once been enforced. And thanks to Lulu Brown, it became immortal. The finger-licking aftermath. In the wake of Lulu Brown's historic showdown with Gainesville law enforcement, the town was swamped by a tidal wave of attention, the likes of which no one had ever imagined. Gainesville, quiet, charming, fried chicken-loving Gainesville, found itself trending nationally. In Georgia, where news cycles were usually dominated by weather reports and football rivalries, this was monumental. For weeks, the chicken incident, known locally as the Great Forkening, dominated every conversation. At barbershops, people would recount Lulu's determined march into City Hall. At churches, pastors wove subtle references to judgment, mercy and poultry into their sermons. At the grocery store, gossip travelled down the aisles faster than the carts could roll. And through it all, one sentiment rose above the noise. Gainesville had changed forever. In fact, almost immediately businesses began capitalizing on the new fame. A local boutique sold shirts that read, "Forks, not in my town." A bakery offered cupcakes decorated with tiny fondant chicken legs. A souvenir shop started selling novelty forks with their tines curled in as if embarrassed to be utensils at all. But the most dramatic transformation happened at Gus's Good Eats. Once a typical southern diner with mismatched chairs and condiments arranged in small metal baskets, Gus's had become a pilgrimage site. People travelled from as far as California just to snap a photo of the infamous table where Lulu had fearlessly wielded her fork. Gus, overwhelmed but proud, installed a velvet rope around the table like a museum exhibit. A sign above it read, "Historic Site, the Lulu Brown Incident of '91. Please do not touch the fork." The fork itself was encased in a glass display box, and naturally Gus began selling replicas in keychain form. Tourists ate it up, figuratively and literally. But amidst the balancing act of fame, Gainesville had a new problem. Everyone wanted to know why the ordinance existed in the first place. Suddenly, reporters and curious visitors weren't satisfied simply hearing that Gainesville had a sense of humour. They wanted history, they wanted origins, they wanted law, they wanted answers. And Gainesville didn't have any. The city council realized, perhaps too late, that no one could quite remember who wrote the law. Some thought it was a joke by a long-gone politician trying to put Gainesville on the map. Others suspected a prank turned permanent. Still, others suggested it had simply appeared, like an unsolicited coupon book, and no one had bothered to remove it. Rumours shimmied around town like mischievous spirits. One theory claimed the law had been introduced after a visiting diplomat, an Englishman who used a knife and fork, insulted a local matriarch. Another rumour suggested that a Georgia state legislator added the ordinance after losing a bet about proper chicken etiquette. A retired council member named Ernest, who was 92 and only wore overalls, insisted that the ordinance was originally written as a joke during a particularly boring session. He claimed that the council, attempting to lighten the mood, passed the chicken law unanimously, then promptly forgot about it. But Ernest also believed squirrels were government spies, so his testimony wasn't considered reliable. Still, the people of Gainesville were proud. If anything, the uncertainty made the town even more interesting. Yet the fame came with a price. The city's tourism office was overwhelmed by calls. One confused traveller from Oregon asked if eating rotisserie chicken with tongs was acceptable. Another tourist wanted to know if chicken salad counted as fried chicken under the law and whether it needed to be eaten with fingers too. The tourism director eventually had to issue a statement clarifying that salads, soups, casseroles and chicken-based dips shall not require finger consumption. This did nothing to help, of course. It only raised more questions. Meanwhile, school teachers struggled to keep students focused. Every classroom buzzed with newfound chicken pride. English teachers assigned essays on what freedom means to me and how chicken fits in. History teachers began covering the ordinance as if it were a major historical event. The science teacher, Mr. Ramirez, ended up giving an accidental lecture about poultry anatomy after a student asked whether the drumstick was structurally designed for finger eating. Even the high school band joined in, performing a halftime show titled Symphony for Drumstick and Marching Horn. Locals loved it. Outsiders were confused, and Gainesville embraced all of it. Still, one group became particularly energized by the chicken ordinance saga. The elders of the town, those who had witnessed Lulu's act of utensil defiance firsthand. A week after the incident, Mama Bird, Gus, Mrs. Hattie Mae Carter and several other respected elders gathered for a town meeting. Not an official one, but one of those unspoken, unofficial gatherings where real decisions get made, usually in someone's living room after too much sweet tea. They met in Hattie Mae's parlour, where floral wallpaper coexisted with crocheted doilies on every surface. A potluck table featured deviled eggs, 3 kinds of cornbread, and a casserole so mysterious that no one dared ask what was in it. "Honey," Mama Bird began, "this town's become famous, and bless our hearts, we don't know what to do with ourselves." "Tourists everywhere," Gus grumbled. "Had a man come in yesterday asking if we sell gluten-free fried chicken. Gluten-free? Do I look like a wizard?" "We can't rely on the mayor," Hattie Mae said. "She's already overwhelmed, and poor Dusty's too scared to issue another ticket. We need to take control of this situation." Mama Bird nodded meaningfully. "We need to make this law make sense." The room went still. Hattie Mae slowly leaned back in her rocking chair. "Make sense? Mama Bird, it's a law about eating chicken with your hands. Nothing about it makes sense." But Mama Bird smiled, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Then we need to give it a story." Now, if Mama Bird said something needed a story, then by all the laws of Southern communication, it needed a story. Mama Bird was the unofficial guardian of Gainesville folklore. She had invented half the ghost stories, embellished the rest, and curated the town's narrative like a librarian of local myth. "Here's what we'll do," she said, clapping her hands. "We're going to create the official story behind the law. Something charming, something our grandchildren can tell, something that'll satisfy reporters so they leave our poor mayor alone." Gus scratched his chin. "You want us to invent history?" "It's better than what we've got now," Mama Bird said. "Which is nothing." Hattie Mae agreed. "At least then we won't have those reporters snooping through archives. Lord knows what else they might find in there." An uneasy shudder ran through the room. The Gainesville archives were rumoured to contain secrets best left untouched, including the minutes from the infamous council meeting of '67, when someone accidentally approved a proposal to create a town mascot shaped like a yam. And so the elders began crafting a myth. They told of a travelling chicken chef who passed through Gainesville long ago, of a great chicken tasting where people argued so passionately about utensils that it nearly tore the town apart, of a compromise, fingers only, that restored peace. They described a town divided by forks and knives, a community healed by bare-handed unity, a symbolic law crafted not for regulation, but for harmony. Did any of it actually happen? Absolutely not. But it was a good story. And that in Gainesville was more important than the truth. The elders rehearsed their tale until it flowed smoothly, with just the right balance of whimsy and plausibility. They agreed to tell no one that they made it up. And then, one by one, they shared it with the town. Soon, every resident knew the story. They recited it to tourists. They repeated it to reporters. They told it to their children. They whispered it at barbecues, nodding solemnly as if passing down a sacred oral tradition. The story spread beyond Gainesville. It appeared in articles. It popped up in travel blogs. It entered folklore databases online. And within months, the fictional origin became widely accepted as fact. And Gainesville, for the first time in months, felt peaceful again. But the elders' work was not done. News of Lulu's arrest continued to make the rounds. The town's fame only grew. Visitors kept pouring in. And Gainesville continued to transform into a place where legend clung to every storefront. Restaurants added finger-eat-in Fridays. The library displayed a history of chicken exhibit. Someone even proposed a fried chicken festival, complete with a parade float shaped like a colossal drumstick. This idea gained momentum quickly, too quickly. Within days, the City Council faced a decision about whether Gainesville should host the first ever Chicken Heritage Festival in celebration of the town's unusual cultural legacy. Opinions were divided. Some argued it would boost tourism and unify the community. Others believed it would turn Gainesville into a theme park. Still others questioned whether it was wise to encourage crowds of tourists carrying giant novelty forks. Yet, despite these concerns, Gainesville had never been a town to shy away from ridiculousness. The council voted unanimously in favour of the festival, and what a festival it was! People arrived in chicken costumes, vendors sold chicken-themed crafts. A marching band played a piece titled The Ballad of Lulu Brown. Children participated in a chicken look-alike contest judged by Mama Bird herself. And Gus proudly demonstrated the proper finger technique for eating chicken, holding the drumstick like a priceless artifact. It was charming. It was chaotic. It was Gainesville. But the highlight came when Lulu Brown, escorted by the mayor, appeared as the festival's guest of honor. She waved to the crowd from a decorated golf cart. She signed autographs. She posed with families. She accepted a sash that read Queen of Chicken. And though she was not supposed to say anything, Lulu grabbed the microphone during the mayor's speech and declared, "I still think the law is silly, but the chicken is delicious, and that's what matters." The crowd roared. Reporters beamed. The mayor sighed but smiled anyway. And just like that, Gainesville's legend grew a little bigger. The law that outlived the legend. Years passed as they inevitably do, carrying with them the gentle erosion of time. Children who once laughed at the Chicken Heritage Festival grew into adults who rolled their eyes at it, even though they attended every year anyway, usually with a turkey leg and a nostalgia-soaked grin. Elders who remembered the days before Gainesville was the chicken town watched the changing world with equal parts delight and bewilderment. Dusty Jenkins retired. Lulu Brown's framed citation remained a cherished family heirloom. And Mama Bird, bless her heart, was elected to the town council 3 years in a row before anyone realized she hadn't technically run. And yet, through every shift in culture, every fad, every election, every new restaurant, one thing in Gainesville stayed the same: the ordinance. The great, notorious, internationally famous fried chicken must be eaten with your fingers municipal law. Still on the books, still never repealed, still delightfully absurd, still real. For most towns, such a thing might have been a burden, an embarrassing reminder of legislative whimsy gone haywire. But Gainesville embraced it. The ordinance had become a cornerstone of local identity, a calling card, a badge of honor, a conversation starter more reliable than any weather complaint. Visitors could not resist asking about it. College students wrote papers on it. Travel vloggers flocked to the town to film themselves bravely eating fried chicken under the stern gaze of imaginary chicken police. Social media influencers staged dramatic reenactments of Lulu Brown's arrest, usually involving overacting, feather boas, and at least 3 rented golf carts. Even Gainesville High School's drama club put on a theatre production titled The Fork Heard Round the World. It was a musical. It had jazz numbers. One student tap danced in a chicken costume. The audience gave standing ovations every single night. But despite its cultural importance, something unexpected began happening. People started questioning what else might be hidden in the city's old ordinances. What if, one historian pondered, the chicken law was just the beginning? What if Gainesville had other long-forgotten laws lurking in the shadows, waiting to spring into the spotlight like over-eager actors? This sparked a frenzy. The local newspaper, the Gainesville Beacon, assigned a team of reporters to conduct a deep dive into the legal archives. Librarians, usually quiet, dignified people, roamed the stacks with the intensity of treasure hunters. Retired council members were interviewed at length, though nearly all of them had identical answers. "I don't know, honey. We passed a lot of nonsense in those days." Citizens waited eagerly to see what the investigation would uncover. Finally, after weeks of research and enough coffee to fuel a jetliner, the newspaper published its findings in a special Sunday edition under the headline, "We found nothing weird except the chicken law." It turned out that Gainesville was, in fact, almost perfectly sensible. No bans on whistling after dark, no restrictions on how many goats a person could legally bring into a grocery store, no bizarre tax on beards or accordion music, just the ordinance, the singular, shining absurdity that shaped the soul of the town. And because it was the only strange law on record, Gainesville loved it even more. But as Gainesville's legend grew, the world beyond it grew louder, faster, and infinitely stranger. The internet became a megaphone for quirky laws everywhere. Articles like "Weird laws in every state," 20 absurd ordinances that actually exist, and "Why does this town hate forks?" circulated endlessly. Gainesville's ordinance was front and centre in all of them. Sometimes the details were wrong. Sometimes writers exaggerated. Sometimes headlines claimed the law was 200 years old, or that the penalty involved plucking chickens in public as punishment, or that residents were required to recite a pledge of finger-eating loyalty. They absolutely were not, although someone did propose it once. But the gist remained true. Gainesville had a finger-eating chicken law, and it had the guts to keep it. Through all the pop culture noise, through all the memes, through all the jokes on late-night TV, no one ever introduced legislation to repeal it. Why would they? The ordinance brought joy, laughter, and a reason for tourists to spend money on novelty shirts. It also became a kind of quiet rebellion. While the rest of the world shifted toward polished presentation, utensils, convenience, and trend-driven cuisine, Gainesville stood proudly greasy and delicious. And in an age of image-conscious dining, of minimalist plates and artisanal cutlery, Gainesville's law felt refreshingly honest. Finger-eating wasn't barbaric. It was community. It was connection. It was a reminder that not everything needed to make sense to be meaningful. Still, even as the ordinance settled comfortably into cultural immortality, Gainesville itself changed. The town grew. New restaurants opened. Some even featured fusion chicken dishes that confused the elders and delighted the youth. One restaurant, let's call it Cluckcraft Kitchen, offered deconstructed fried chicken. Mama Bird, a frequent diner there, once stared at her plate and said, "Honey, this looks like a chicken sneezed on a cutting board." Despite her critique, she returned every Thursday because the seasoning was, in her words, unrighteously good. Generations shifted, traditions evolved. New residents arrived, unaware of the law, until someone inevitably asked at a neighborhood barbecue, Why is everyone eating with their hands? Is this a Gainesville thing? And then the entire gathering would erupt in laughter and storytelling. Young couples explained it to each other on first dates. Grandparents told the tale to grandchildren while sharing picnic lunches. Bartenders heard it from out-of-towners and responded with memorized monologues. Even schools made it part of the curriculum in a light-hearted unit called Local Legends, and how we somehow ended up with them. And every year, on the anniversary of her arrest, Lulu Brown's family returned to Gus's Good Eats for a commemorative lunch. They sat at the historic table, now permanently polished from countless photos and curious hands. They shared chicken. They shared memories. And in honor of Lulu, they placed one single fork on the table, upright, like a monument to mischief. Yet, as Gainesville aged alongside its ordinance, a question nibbled at the town's collective mind. Would the law last forever? Governments update codes, ordinances change, times shift. Could Gainesville one day decide that the law, beloved though it was, had run its course? That question came to a head during a city council meeting when a new, freshly elected council member named Davis McAllister raised the idea that maybe, just maybe, they should modernize the municipal code. He cleared his throat dramatically, as politicians tend to do. Colleagues, perhaps we should consider revisiting outdated or symbolic ordinances, particularly those involving fried chicken and dining utensils. Chaos erupted. Mama Bird, seated in the audience, nearly fainted. The mayor dropped her pen. Someone gasped loud enough to echo. A teenager live-streaming the meeting whispered, "Oh, this man is about to get voted out so fast." Council member Davis attempted to explain. "I'm not saying we remove it," he clarified desperately. "I'm only asking whether we should reassess." But the room drowned him out. "Heretic!" someone shouted. "Unhand our chicken laws!" cried another. And in Gainesville's tradition of passionate storytelling, speeches were made. Long, emotional speeches full of metaphor, community pride, and at least one chicken-based pun per participant. In the end, the council voted not merely to keep the ordinance, but to reaffirm it, unanimously. Except for Davis, who later apologized publicly and brought a casserole to Mama Bird as a peace offering. She accepted it kindly, though she did poke at it suspiciously with her fork before deciding it was edible. The law remained untouched. Years went on, and Gainesville grew into its legend like a well-worn pair of boots. Comfortable, iconic, impossible to replace. Today, the ordinance still resides in the municipal code. One of those delightful laws that locals quote with pride and newcomers assume is satire, until someone points them to the actual line in the code book. It stands there quietly, unassuming, nestled among zoning regulations and noise ordinances, like an inside joke written into government eternally. Some towns have statues, some have slogans, Some have historical sites. Gainesville? Gainesville has a finger-eating chicken ordinance, a law born of humour, shaped by myth, immortalised by Lulu Brown's rebellious fork, celebrated by festivals, defended by generations, and embraced by everyone who's ever taken a bite of fried chicken in that warm, eccentric corner of Georgia. It reminds the town who they are, not because they need the rule, but because the rule tells a story of tradition, a story of laughter, a story of people who care more about flavour than formality, a story of a grandmother who refused to put down her fork, and above all else, a story about a place where the strangest law in the books somehow became the heart of the community. So, if you ever find yourself in Gainesville, sitting down at a restaurant with a plate of golden fried chicken steaming before you, remember this. You are participating in decades of tradition. You are part of a legend. You are holding history in your hands, literally. Because if you reach for a fork, well, someone just might tell you the tale. And trust me, they'll tell it proudly.